Hello and welcome to Of the People. We are back. And before we roll into the monologue, I want to let everybody know to make sure you stay tuned for our last segment. Steve Rosenberg, innovator, author, speaker, former COO of Jewish Federation in Philadelphia, runs the, I think, Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame, just a really strong Israel advocate and knows more in 5 minutes about Israel than you and I put together. So folks, stay tuned. We were going to have him on the first segment, but timing issue. He's going to be on the last segment of the show. Steve Rosenberg, you don't want to miss that. And there's that.
All right. And here's the
Ericka.
monologue.
Yeah, where's the monologue?
Is it
Ericka?
right here? Is it here?
No.
No monologue? No monologue.
No, you're really. Well, I think that was your idea today, as I recall.
Well, Robert, I know we have a routine, you guys. We have a normal routine we do here. We come on, we chit chat, and we decided to do something a little bit different today because we thought it was important for our audience, for our viewers to understand not just why our guests think Israel Appreciation Day is so important, but why Robert thinks Israel Appreciation Day is so important. And this is really an opportunity for you, our audience, to get to know Robert a little bit better, where he comes from, what his background is, and again, why these things are so important, why he's so passionate about it. And excuse me. So we decided we're changing up the format a little bit, and it's me getting to interview you today, Robert Chernin.
No tough questions, please. I am not prepared.
All I have are tough questions. If anybody who's watched the show for any length of time, if you've been around at our, hold on, guys.
Uh-oh, frog in your throat?
Totally. If any of you have been around for our after hours, we joke and say, oh, it's, where Ben and Ericka ask Robert Jewish stuff.
And Robert asks Ben black stuff.
Right, exactly. And we joke about that, but there's a real sincere seriousness to it. And the reason is, in my belief, it is my belief that lack of proximity is the greatest problem that we face in understanding one another when we're dealing with hate, misunderstanding, whatever it is. A lot of times people just don't understand each other. If you've never grown up around Jewish people, if you've never grown up around Christians or Black people or fill in the blank, you don't know and you don't understand where they're coming from, their background, why they think what they do, and it makes it harder to understand one another. And Jewish things that are related to Judaism, Jewishness, Israel are so sensitive nowadays, Robert.
They are. Especially to the pro-Hamas Death Eaters, as I call them. But go ahead.
So, we hear a lot, or we heard a lot during the Black Lives Matter riots and during that movement about the talk, right? All Black parents have the talk with their kids about cops and about this and about that. And I wondered if you could share a little bit about what maybe your parents, what the talk was like from your parents about the history of the Jewish people.
That's a pretty wide open question. Let me start this way, that I grew up in New Jersey in an integrated neighborhood in terms of religions and also in terms of race. It wasn't hugely diverse, but it was certainly diverse for its time. It was in Union County. I remember driving around seeing signs at various institutions that would say no Jews allowed. Right. So that was stuff. And I would ask my dad, and there was a golf course, there was some private clubs, some other things. Honestly, he never made a big deal about it. He just sort of, shrugged his shoulders and said, that's some of the things you got to get used to. I still remember on the playground in 6th grade, someone called me a kike. I didn't really respond real well. He ended up with something broken, but that's okay. And I ended up suspended because, of course, I was the one who started it. my dad always taught me that you got to fight for what you believe in, and that, look, the whole concept of fairness really is a misnomer, right? I mean, fair is always a question of who's defining it. So growing up, I mean, again, the neighborhood was integrated in terms of religion, whether it was, Christianity or Jewish, and there were some other families of different religions there. So really it was except in certain areas in New Jersey, it was fine. So it wasn't really a talk, but I always remember, in the classroom that they would, say the Pledge of Allegiance, which obviously was great. And then there was, usually a morning prayer or a, moment of silence or something about, Christianity or Jesus. That was a little odd to me. But, my dad always used to say, look, as long as you know who you are, those kinds of things shouldn't bother you, and let people be who they are. So, I mean, I won't say it was uber tolerant, but it certainly wasn't intolerant either.
Yeah. So it's funny to hear you say that there were signs that said things like "No Jews allowed," because I'm trying to think of the time period. I mean, is this when we're still having
In the 60s.
segregated? So this was when we're still having segregated lunch counters and all this kind of stuff. So
Well, it wasn't quite. Well, in New Jersey, there was no. I mean, remember in the 60s, any segregation was really relegated mostly to the South, but the southern states. But that doesn't mean there wasn't racism or there wasn't, that the black community tended to congregate in a certain area, whether it was Plainfield or somewhere else in New Jersey. The Jewish community generally tended to, depending on, I guess, sort of your, whether you were Reformed or conservative or Orthodox, it would depend on sort of the density of population of the community you were in. I grew up conservative, which is sort of the middle one, right? Reform is more, let's call it more liberal, Orthodox, right.
Where you have two kitchens.
Well, we didn't have two kitchens, I can tell you that. So, but I grew up. I will tell you that when I grew up, I actually where I sort of really connected with being Jewish is when I went to college in Montreal. Right? Montreal has a very large Jewish community, and it sometimes takes you to step outside of yourself or outside of your comfort zone to sort of look back and see where you came from and who you were. Right. So not only did I become much more patriotic and more sort of American focused being in a foreign country. And most people say, well, it's only Montreal. It's not really a foreign country. You drive through a toll booth, bonjour, quel est votre nom? Hello, what is your name? You drive through the toll booth, you're in a different country. But it really did force me to look at my upbringing, both as an American, but as someone who grew up, and is Jewish. And it's really in college that started to really come into its own. Other than that, it was just sort of the way the cards were dealt. And my dad, there was no talk per se, as I think you and I have talked about, or you, Ben, and I have talked about.
Yeah.
And then certainly as I got into my 20s and into my 30s, Judaism became much more personal to me, much more important to me as I got older, because obviously you have to, at some point take responsibility for who and what you are and what you believe in. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So I sort of laughed when you said that, because when you said the no Jew sign, because nowadays, if you're Jewish, you're white adjacent, so in one generation, Jewish people have gone from, being basically second-class citizens or essentially to being white oppressors. And I think that's kind of like, how did we get there in one generation?
Well, I think you got to start a little earlier. I mean, when I grew up, people, you still heard whispers of, the Jews killed Jesus, right? I mean, there was still that kind of a sort of a divide, and I'm happy to say that, over the years, I think, the Jewish community and the Christian community have formed, really incredible bonds with each other and have sort of moved beyond sort of the parochial and colloquialisms and the narrowness of on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
I honestly, Robert, I didn't know that was a thing. Okay. I mean, I've only been a Christian for like 5 minutes in the grand scheme of things. I've never heard anyone in my church say anything like that before. That's crazy.
Well, yeah, it is. But look, I grew up with different things where people would throw a penny on the street and go, here, Jew, go get it. right? I mean, so there were some interesting things. Although I will say, I had a very close friend of mine, may he rest in peace. Olin Jackson. We trained martial arts together, a black gentleman, and became very fast friends. And we talked about racism a lot. And what he said to me is, because I would say, look, I grew up Jewish. I know what it is to be discriminated against. He said, but the difference, Robert, is you don't wear it on your skin color. People can see me a mile away and they know I'm black and I'm coming this way. Right. Yeah. So it was a really interesting dialogue and a very interesting exchange with him. But through history, you look at the different stereotypes, the Jews with the long nose. If you go back to Oliver Twist, and I'm going to give you history, right? Or at least literature, right? Fagin, clearly they never said he was Jewish, but Fagin was sort of the hook nose guy. I mean, so there's a whole lot of sort of the stereotypes built in that I'm happy to say I think we've overcome. But growing up, you just dealt with it. I mean, there was no talk per se.
Yeah. And a lot of what I've heard you say in our conversations, or what I've taken away from our conversations, is you grew up a fighter. You basically, you were kind of justice oriented from your youth. You were focused on, whether you did correctly or not all of the time. It seems like, values of like hard work, family, like those things were really instilled in you in your youth. And then they were reinforced through martial arts and some of the things that you participated in as a young man. Can you say more about how that how martial arts and your youth has shaped the man that you are today?
Well, let's back up. But first of all, I appreciate the question. Let's back up for a second. Okay. I didn't start by being a fighter. I started by getting beat up a lot.
Okay. All right.
And realized I didn't like it. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you only have to get kicked in the head by a mule a few times to realize you don't like it. I still remember it's either 6th grade or 7th grade, I was getting picked on by, the school bully.
Oh, name him. What's his name?
No, not going there. So, went home to my father crying, beat up. And so he calls the other guy's father, and not to chew him out, but he said, bring your kid to the school. So both of us went to the school. The fathers are standing there and they said, we want both of you to go behind the school and fight it out. Right. Which we did. And
what?
Look, I won't say that I won, but I gave as good as I got. And that was a valuable lesson for me. My father wanted to teach me how to fight. And, you don't shirk from a fight. Right. That sort of is seminal for me.
Okay.
I mean, can you imagine people doing that today? 2 parents take their kids to the school and tell them to start, fighting each other.
Oh, no. CPS would be knocking on your door.
Yeah. We call them DYFS, Division of Youth and Family Services. But so that really started. And then, the day I was 17, and I played all the sports. I played, unlike our guest, Steve, who's a basketball guy, I played football. I was a middle linebacker. I was small and I was mean and I liked to hit people. And I played baseball, which was really my passion. Had things been different, I should have been a center fielder for the New York Yankees, but that didn't work like that.
Okay.
So at 17, I walked into a martial arts school because, I wanted to formally learn how to fight back. And I just stuck it. It's been 40 years. And the first class I said, this is sort of my life. And martial arts at this point is not something I do. It's who I am. It's not, when you get to the point where you can do damage, you realize you're not supposed to. It's only in self-defense. It's only to protect those people you love. But it does instill in you a code, and it does instill in you a fighting spirit to fight for what's right. And that's why this whole thing with Israel Appreciation Day is so important, because I will tell you, to segue to Israel Appreciation Day, because that's really what I want to talk about today. So Justice Potter Stewart, the late Supreme Court justice in the early 1900s, or the early 20th century, 1900s, 20th century, was asked to define pornography. And he said, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. Right. Likewise, the horrific attacks on October 7th on Israel and Israeli citizens and men, women, and children. Right. If we can't call that evil, right. I don't know. I can't define evil, but I know it when I see it. And that was evil. Right. If we've lost our capacity to call out evil when we see it, then to me, we have lost our humanity and perhaps we're beyond redemption. So that was such a seminal thing. And I was involved politically in Jewish issues. And, again, not like our guest coming on who's way more involved over many more years than I have been. But, and that's Steve Rosenberg. But there was just something galvanizing. It was tight. It's almost like I've had enough of this and someone has to do something. Not that by myself I can, but it cultivated or brought up in me this fighting spirit that I haven't felt in a long time. And what it made me understand is that there's no one. I mean, yes, it's important to support Israel, and that's what we're trying to do with Israel Appreciation Day. But it's also about this country, right? It's about the hearts and minds in this country. It's about trying to change the narrative, because the narrative on the other side is really simple, right? Israel equals occupier equals bad, and Palestinians / Hamas equals victims equals good. That's their narrative. And there was nothing in an organized fashion that looks at Israel and all the wonderful things that Israel has done and contributed to the world. And it's not just because they're a Jewish state or the Jewish homeland. It's not about the Holocaust. It's not about that they're a U.S. ally, but it's everything else that Israel represents that no one was focusing on. And that really was the genesis. And I love to take credit for coming up with the idea of Israel Appreciation Day. A friend of mine did that. It's not me, but we talked about it and I went, this is a great idea. And so we've been, putting this together for about 6 months now with the help of people like our guest, Steve Rosenberg, who's been a huge help in this along the way. And we've built a good team of people to do it. But this is all about fighting back. And this is all about the next generation, because when you and I are long dead and gone, we have to make sure these people understand the seminal importance of Israel, not just as a Jewish state, not just as a U.S. ally, right? But for everything else that makes it so seminal, right? There's an old saying that as goes Israel, goes the fate of the Western world. And I believe that.
Yeah.